Well, thank you, Jonah. Jonah let everyone know where they were. You're at the Social Vision Conference. If you meant to click on some other content, well, now you're here, and so you might find it interesting. As Michael Wexler, I'm one of the co-authors of the book Social Vision, which prompted some of this. And with us today, we have my good friend, and I've been practicing how to introduce everybody in their own language. So I said Guten Abend to Professor Zunker earlier, which is a big expression of German. And I asked our co-author, Ellie Rubin, who's English, how I should say something to Dr. Loewenthal in British. And he reminded me that actually they speak English and we have a form of a terrible dialect. And okay, thank you. So without further ado, we're going to start with Professor Zunker, who is I'll read it from my cheat sheet, the Rudolf Carnap Senior Professor, Emeritus Professor of Social Pedagogy at the University of Wuppertal. And I'll also introduce Dr. Naftali Loewenthal before we start. Teaching Fellow, lecturing in Jewish Spirituality at University College in London. And so our topic again is social vision in the real world. An interesting topic and a broad topic, and we'll see what our experts have to say. So Professor Zunker, if you want to start first.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Michael, and please give my regards to your father and tell him that I read the book fully, so I'm ready now to write a review.
He'll be happy to hear that, yes.
I guess when he invited me, my role is the role of the agent provocateur, the troublemaker, with respect to the discourses you set out in a really great book. And I thought I'd title my small talk with emancipatory social transformation, because there are two sentences with which I would like to fight over 2 days with Philip Wexler and his co-authors. I come to that later. Let me say I know the work of Philip Wexler not only from Holy Sparks on, but much, much earlier was the representative of the radical sociology of education. And I know him since 30 years quite well. And I saw his way via the term resacralization. And I think social vision is the attempt to discuss the possibilities of transformative theorizing and practicing in a new way. And I remember that we started debating his Holy Sparks a long time ago when the New Age was his last hope against consumerist capitalism. I feel I'm an outsider in the field of a lot of these discussions because I don't know almost anything about the Hasidic movement. I leave that to Tali, and I only know this one famous film about a girl leaving New York, coming home to London, and has been alienated to the Hasidic movement and the problems. I will come to the woman's question very shortly. My expertise is in social theory, social philosophy, and then fortunately, I studied Protestant theology and got an examination, have a vocation. And a lot of what is developed in the book reminds me of what has gone debated in Protestant theology since the Reformation in the 16th century. And especially with respect to the theology of the 20th century, Karl Barth, Bultmann, Käsemann, there are a lot of leitmotifs we can connect. And as a personal note, I grew up in a diaspora in Northwest Germany in the Calvinist tradition, and that meant against the traditions of Lutherans and Catholics, a special political tradition, especially a little bit resisting against the Nazis in the Nazi time, in the Bekennende Kirche, in the confessing church. And that was my politicization aspect. And therefore, I'm still interested in the question of social transformation and emancipation. That's my first few remarks. And my central reference with respect to what that means is, as I think, one of the most relevant phrases, and I sent to some of you my notes from the Communist Manifesto by Marx and Engels. In place of the old bourgeois society with its classes and class antagonisms, we shall have an association in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. And that, of course, is relevant against all these pseudo-communists, which were in reality state capitalists in the dictatorships in Middle and East Europe, or in China, or in other places in the world. The second reference is the question, how do we analyze human history? And especially with respect to the question of the relationship between possibilities of human development, full human development on the one side, and on the other side, the oppression via domination connected to class, gender, race, sexual orientation, abilities, and so forth. The challenge today is the question how to analyze capitalism, which was developed, as we know, some 100 years ago, especially in the forms of neoliberalism, neoconservatism, and casino capitalism. And that's the subject of what I'm dealing with, especially in my scientific research in one field of critical theory, from Horkheimer, Marcuse to Adorno, the so-called old Frankfurt School. I don't believe in Habermas, although he just published his 1700 pages History of Philosophy 2, but on the title Belief and Knowledge. And on the other side, and that's the question, if it is a dialectical contradiction in the Hegelian sense, we have what is written in the Social Vision book, and that's my number 4C for those of you who have this paper. And there on the page 78 to 79, the book says, Hasidism deserves to be understood not only as a social movement, but also as an intellectual tradition that analyzes social ideas. Hasidism provides theoretical models that are alternative, and that's one of the sentences I would like to debate, to those provided by the modern traditions of sociology and critical theory. And I think, firstly, one has to distinguish between sociology and critical theory, because that are really two different words. And then there is, that's under 4C2, Schneerson had a long-standing fascination with the intersection of Torah's timeless wisdom, as he regarded it, and the new discoveries of wisdom. And that's, of course, a problem in a political, in a hermeneutical, and in a social meaning, because I think there is no timeless wisdom. We have the Proverbs in the Old Testament, which I like very much, but timeless wisdom is difficult because we have all times the connection, as we knew from hermeneutics, from Gadamer's truth and method at least, between worldview and semantics, and we have the truth question. And especially the problem of the worldview and semantics is of interest because I'm a fan of ancient Greek, not so much of Latin, I confess. And the question is, what did the old Greek mean when they wrote and used categories like phronesis, or sophrosyne, or theoria, or bios theoretikos, bios pratikos? And I guess it's the same problem with Hebrew. Secondly, second part of my remarks, who acts, question mark? Who does the work of transforming the society, in which way? And that's the topic which is dealt with in your book. And it's a question of agency, it's a question of subject or actor, and that's more difficult because that's a question of the use of the category of autonomy, and there are some reflections in the book, but this autonomy is in a special way shaped, and I think what we have to be aware of in the continental European tradition is the tradition between Kant, Hegel, and Marx in the use of autonomy. And then autonomy in all cases is a special type of interconnectedness. And that could be of interest in your analysis of the writings of your subject. And thirdly, in this context, and that's, I must say, one of my other research fields is German fascism, and how it could happen that educated bourgeois became fascists, mass murderers, and mass perpetrators, and how we would call them, I would say very simple, mean people. It's a question of the use of the term leader, Führer. And I'm aware of the tradition of the Exodus book with Moses as the leader through the desert, but we have to be very cautious in contemporary times with the use of the term of leader. And of course, it's a challenge of the relationship between leader and community, or as the Leninists would call it, between vanguard and the masses. And that's 4C, 4C, let me see, where did I write it? 4C gamma, but we leave that. And that's connected, the question of who is the actor who acts, that's connected to the problem of what makes a human human, I think. And that's one of the topics. And who is dealing with this question? Is it anthropology? Is it theology? Is it philosophy? And of course, we have the tradition, we have the traditional philosophy with Aristotle and the zoon politikon, the political being. But we have modern studies. Noam Chomsky, for example, published a book a few years ago with this question, which kind of beings are we? Very interesting. And I like him as a linguist, I like him as a political intellectual very much. But the special contribution is made by Michael Tomasello, who is the most interesting evolutionary psychologist in the last decades. And he deals with questions like, why do we cooperate? And what is the basis of altruism in the nature, in brackets, in humans? And then it's, of course, the women's question, and it's a problem how we overcome gender stereotyping. Thirdly, Philip Wexler, education and Bildung, the famous German term for education as full human development. And that's interesting because in your book, that's for B and D, Schneerson not only diagnosed this cultural malady, that's Hinckley and Reagan stuff, but forcefully argues that it could only be healed through the educational inculcation of a basic sense of responsibility toward God and humanity. And the other quotation is Schneerson went on to say that if schools would instead prioritize the need to fashion, build up and construct the inclination of the person's heart, endowing pupils with good character and an axiomatic sense of God's providential investment in human life. That's 186, 107, the other was 106 alone. And that's interesting because that's especially with respect to the last quotation, it's a special tradition which is connected to the question, what is human, what makes humans human? which starts with Pascal, who talks about raison du cœur, the reason of the heart, and the Jansenists, which with Lucien Goldman was dealing, to Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. It's all times a question, what constitutes a person's heart, and how can we look into a person's heart, and what is it in the alternative to cognitivistic reduction of humans. And the first point is, and there's my question, what is the meaning of educational inculcation, is relevant because that's the bridge to Adorno and his education for maturity and responsibility. And Adorno, as the representative of critical theory, is concerned about democracy, the mediation of democracy and maturity. He says this education has to be an education to contradict and to resist and to shape the right consciousness. And that is an educational question. Can values be taught? A discussion we have since decades, I don't know, but I would say no. We only can say we need role models who live the values they allegedly maintain are relevant. And then the last element in this part is the problem with education is education alone can't do a lot. Societal structures are shaping the personalities, and the question is, how can we correct what has been shaped? Fourth, and that's my last point, foundations in Hasidism and perspectives of transformation, and in critical theory, Adorno, Horkheimer, Marcuse. If I take it easy, then I reproduce what I found as quotations in your book. Then one can say, on the one side, in the Hasidic tradition, especially in this Lubavitch positioning, it's the foundation is God, socio-mystical experience or experiences, the role of the sacred, and the critique of secularization. And in this context, that's 4a, we have quite a lot of positionings. That's the end of the book, page 229. The divine infuses everyday life and permeates social interaction, horizontally between fellow humans and vertically between humanity and God, so that the transcendent essence of divine being is unfolded and realized in human activity in the world. Schneerson's messianic aspiration was that on this base, new paradigm would take hold of society as a whole, a sacred paradigm of dynamic interchange and mutuality between individuals, communities, and nations. And then the sentence, Schneerson wanted to re-enchant the world. He wanted to re-enchant and re-sacralize the everyday experiences, practices, and interactions of all people everywhere. That's interesting because it's overcoming the Jewish particularity. And in this context, I can say this is versus, and you have it 229, 230, against the polarization of capitalism versus socialism, and then comes half sentence, which I would fight with you over, which respectively advocate for static utopias of personal completeness and collective sameness. Schneerson envisioned a dynamic state of joyous reciprocity. So I would say in the Marxist tradition, the genuine Marxist tradition, critical theory, you wouldn't find this utopia of personal completeness and collective sameness, especially in Adorno's critique of Paul Tillich in Contra Paulum from 1944, you find the critique on this idea of collectivism. Therefore, I think one has to discuss what that means. In the other field, we have with critical theory an historical materialistic approach, the critique of capitalism in the center, of the capitalist mode of societalization in different periods of capitalism and the consequences of capitalist societalization modes in different times. And we have the debates on varieties of capitalism. We have the perspective of overcoming capitalism in a liberated society, and that's especially the question of production, reproduction, and ownership rights. So self-management instead of capitalist private ownership. And this can be very interestingly connected to Eric Olin Wright's approach with the Real Utopias project. There are the quotations on the paper, and with Henri Lefebvre's idea of the cultural revolution instead of only a political revolution, which doesn't change enough. So transformation must be qualitatively emancipatory for all and not only for an elite. Final remark, commonalities between Hasidic ideas and theorizing and the critical theory. My question would be, if there is a relationship between immanence and transcendence, how would that like in the Hasidic tradition? Because in Adorno, in the negative dialectic, we find a quite clear idea that the immanence and the transcendence are mediated. And on the paper under Adorno 0.11b, he says, for transcendence feeds on nothing but the experiences we have in immanence. And the essential sentence is at the end of the paragraph, what is must be changeable if it is not be all. That's the one point. And the other point, and the relevant point, is the starting point for an alliance, for a possible alliance maybe between Hasidic ideas and theorizing and critical theory is 1.1a, the last sentence of the negative dialectics. There is solidarity between such thinking, as it is negative dialectics, and metaphysics at the time of its fall. And that's of course a challenge for the Hasidic movement, because the book believes that there will be a revival. And in the end of the Minima Moralia, Adorno makes clear what it is all about. It is the idea of redemption. The only philosophy which can be responsibly practiced in face of despair, and that's the state today, I would say, is the attempt to contemplate all things as they would present themselves from the standpoint of redemption. Knowledge has no light but that shed on the world by redemption. All else is reconstruction, mere. And that's formulated, as I would say, in the common language of the Social Vision book and of Adorno's theorizing, in the semantics of messianism. So the question is, how can we mediate messianism and an emancipatory social transformation? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Zunker. That was excellent and very interesting. We'll turn now to our other, everyone is on the continent tonight, so we have wisdom from Britain, as it were, to Dr. Tali Loewenthal. And Tali, you probably want to unmute yourself. And we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much for enabling me to take part in this fascinating conference. Now, just a little note at the beginning. Shaul Magid commented earlier today that if you are Chassid of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, you should call him the Rebbe. So that's what I'm going to be doing. But I hope that doesn't prevent any kind of critical perspective. Now, this little presentation is based on chapter 4 of Social Vision, which is the principle of reciprocity between self, community, and cosmos, page 111. Now there it quotes the Rebbe saying, fully formed theory of the ideal principle by which society should function namely the principle of reciprocity. This is what Rabbi Schneerson, the Rebbe, was presenting. A theory that defies reduction to either of the two poles of modern social discourse and is not merely a compromise between them. It's at once individualistic in orientation as its capitalism and collectivistic in orientation as its socialism. Its fundamental tenet is that individuals can only achieve personal success and happiness through engaging in a reciprocal dynamic of giving and receiving. Now, this profound chapter explores reciprocity in economics, in education, in marriage, self, society, interaction with the cosmos, transformation of self, personal quests and goals. But I want to just look at one particular element, the allusion to socialism, which occurs right at the beginning of the chapter and also later in discussion of the kibbutz socialist system. Now, I live in London, UK, in a district called Stamford Hill, part of the borough of Hackney. Hackney has had a socialist council for generations. For 70 years, the MP it elects has always been socialist, Labour. Socialist mayors of Hackney have attended various events at Lubavitcher House, such as Lag BaOmer parades. Several of the local Haredi, that means very orthodox Rabbanim, have themselves been councillors in the local council. Most have been conservative, capitalist, but one very notable figure, the late Rabbi Avraham Pinter, was a socialist, and he truly believed in socialism. So what I want to try to do in this paper is isolate what I consider the essence of socialism, discuss its contrast with capitalism, and consider the whole in terms of Chabad. Now, one might see terrible contrasts between Chabad and socialism, that really they cannot be bedfellows in any way. But when I speak of the essence, in Hasidic thought, the essence joins opposites. Etzem noseh hafachim. And so there may be deep differences between socialism and Hasidism, but on a certain level, there are also important connections. Now, what do I claim as the essence of socialism? Let's first consider Karl Marx, the grandson of a rabbi. Looking at the Communist Manifesto written with Engels, which has already been quoted by Heinz, we see the central theme of the exploitation of the proletariat by the bourgeoisie and the closing appeal, working men of all countries unite, an appeal to revolution to change the world. The workers have nothing to lose but their chains. This adrenaline-raising aspect of socialism stroke communism is one aspect. To me, a more important aspect, in a sense, what is being called the humanist aspect of Marx, is expressed in his Das Kapital, especially in the lengthy footnotes. Here we see carefully collected from official documents about Factory Act, commissions of inquiry, other much official material, the pain, concern for the pain that people are suffering. And he does this in a very, very detailed way. And he covers many kinds of suffering. Workers in factories in the cities, farmhands in the countryside, and he stresses the lack of education for the young, despite repeated government attempts to remedy the situation. It's a carefully constructed picture of human suffering, which could be compared with his contemporary Charles Dickens. So one aspect of the essence of socialism, in my view, is concern for the pain and plight of one's fellow human being. The second element, which I consider the essence, is particularly visible in the young Marx. Marx writing on the Jewish question, for example, is the identification of the theme of alienation and the concern to regain oneself. There are a number of definitions of alienation, but one is the idea that the person becomes alienated from his or her own self and says he sees the production which he's engaged in producing, or simply money, as the reality of his or her being. Thus, the essence of socialism is the concern for physical, psychological, and spiritual suffering of another person. Now, the problematic nature of capitalism is encapsulated in a quote that Eric Wright gives from G.A. Cohen. Even when speaking of helping other people, the capitalist logic is, I help you because it's good for me. And the socialist claims, I help you because it's good for you. So in Wright's careful discussion in envisioning real utopias, he carries the idea that capitalism and socialism are not necessarily either or. They could be understood as working together in a society. And I would say there are capitalist tendencies and socialist tendencies, individualist concern for me and my welfare and profit, the profit of my company, my factory, my ruling class, and by contrast, the socialist concern for the welfare and good of the collective, including the poor and, in biblical terms, the stranger at the gate. Now, how does all this fit with Jewish thought? Obviously, the socialist tendency can be read as love of one's neighbor, and the unambiguously universal concept presented by the Rebbe in a famous interview, acts of goodness and kindness, concern for the well-being of others with whom one comes in contact, whether as a parent, teacher, employer, employee, colleague, spouse, neighbor, and further, as the Rebbe says, concern for someone whom one has never met. Now, social vision presents the Rebbe's teaching of reciprocity when considered against the twin axes of capitalism, individualism, and socialism, collectivism, as both and. It has both individualistic and collectivist aspects, which are simultaneously important. As an individual making a profit, whether in economic or educational terms, one's fulfillment is to share that wealth. And each individual needs also to receive in one area of life or the other. Now here are two, I believe, is the Chabad answer to alienation. Rabbi Shner Zalman describes in Tanya, 1797, a process whereby a person becomes alienated. He calls it in exile. By putting his personal focus on the money he earns, he has lost his own self. But by giving away part of his money in charity, he reclaims himself. Through reciprocity, there is personal redemption. Now, a problem that's been raised earlier in this conference, including today, is the way that social vision extrapolates from a Jewish to a universal context. When one considers the sources, love of one's neighbor as a legal imperative is really about one's Jewish neighbor. But when in that interview the Rebbe spoke about acts of goodness and kindness, he was unequivocally speaking about society as a whole. Now, most of the passages which Social Vision quotes in chapter 4 are speaking to Jews, the Rebbe speaking to Jews about being Jewish. But in an interesting extract from a letter, page 128, he says, if the person turning to me with such a problem as you describe were a Gentile, I would say to him, you are too much wrapped up in yourself with your own emotions and feelings and aspirations. Stop being concerned with your own problems. You must get away from yourself and begin to think of others. It's time to begin an active participation in society, to give and to give generously. The opportunities are many and the need is great. You have your choice, social work, charitable activities, or even scientific research. In fact, that individual was a Jew, and the Rebbe points him towards Jewish solutions to its problem of studying Torah and keeping mitzvot. But nonetheless, the Rebbe's vision included the Gentile world. Now we can see this also in the differing modes of communication by the Rebbe. Admittedly, although he spoke several languages, in public gatherings, he almost always spoke in Yiddish. But there were certain differences between the way he spoke in a Hasidic gathering on a Shabbat, when only those physically present could hear him, to that on a weekday, when his words were being broadcast by phone to Lubavitch centers around the world, beginning in 1970, and even more so from 1980, when the gathering was being broadcast on cable TV and was likely to be seen by many non-Jews. In fact, it was also in the 1980s that the Rebbe began his overt 7 Noahide Law campaign. There may well be a connection there. As the reach of his communication became wider, the level of the way he communicated adapted to that wider audience to fill what he saw as their need. But what about the way social vision uses concepts which in their original source are not expressed in universal terms, but social vision tries to broaden them and universalize them. Is that justified? Well, I believe they are, because I think that the Hasidic texts speak on many, many levels. And although it may on one level speak only about the Jewish soul and various aspects relating to the Jew, nonetheless, it's something that one can extrapolate from to include the non-Jew and non-Jewish society and non-Jewish society as a whole. Now, there is another factor. There is social vision presents interesting comments made by the Rebbe about the kibbutz in its correspondence with Kaddish Luz, an Israeli trade unionist and left-wing politician. The goal of the collective, claimed the Rebbe, is to enhance each individual as a person, not to level people to one standard, but to help each person achieve his or her own highest capabilities. But there's another factor, ideology. Now, Eric Wright mentions this as an element in what he calls social reproduction, the continuity and development of society in any particular direction, be it capitalist or socialist. The Rebbe refers to this issue in his letter to Kaddish Luz, and as I explained there, Luz had written an autobiographical book, Stones on the Way, exploring the nature of the kibbutz, and in a passage which I didn't find quoted in Social Vision, perhaps I missed it, the Rebbe also wrote, I did not find in your book an answer to this problem. What should one give to the generation born in the kibbutz as a goal or an ideal that they will want to reach, and therefore be ready to give work and effort and self-sacrifice for the benefit of the group? What is the ideal? Now, this is not just a question about the kibbutz. It is about the world. We can see in Social Vision and its sources that the Rebbe provided a universal ideology, acts of goodness and kindness in the general framework of the Noahide laws, leading to the personal and general redemption. The Noahide laws mean laws, do this and do not do that, but also, and perhaps more significant, values, the values of reflection on the divine, respect for human life, respect for the family, mutual trust, respect for all living creatures, education, justice. Now, sometime in the 1980s, I gave in to the Lubavitcher Rebbe this list, which I've just read to you, organized in the form of a kind of a diagram, and I wanted the Rebbe to comment on this. And he told me that I should discuss it with Rabbi Chodakov, the Rebbe's chief aide and secretary. And I had an interview with Rabbi Chodakov discussing these concepts as Noahide values. He said I should add the comment that they are based on Maimonides. And that really is something which I believe is something very central in the Rebbe's perspective on the world. In practical terms, these values have practical ramifications for education and also for business ethics. For example, you may have a high-tech company, a successful company. Is it concerned for the well-being of the families of its workers, whether at factory floor level or in the boardroom? There were certain companies that would not send their senior executives away from their homes for more than a very short time because they could see that this would lead to the breakup of families. These values could provide the ethical and spiritual framework for the civic community, whether it's organized on capitalist or socialist lines, and it would therefore be concerned to promote such values for every person, female and male, black and white, rich or poor. So here, I believe, is the full answer to the question of alienation, a framework, and I think that that is the real problem. A framework of spiritual and moral values enables each person to view their life as having meaning beyond immediate aspects of personal wealth and personal benefit. Viktor Frankl's thought about noetic well-being is relevant here. Social vision potentially presents the goal to make a world of goodness, a dwelling for the divine. And this is a project which all individuals, whether in greater or lesser extent capitalist or socialist socio-economic systems, can share together.
Thank you, Dr. Loewenthal. That was extraordinary, both of you. I fear some of our attendees listening from the beach will have to go back through the transcripts and listen once again. So interesting. A lot to digest. Professor Zunker, we have a few minutes, and I thought, would you want to, do you have any thoughts or a reply to Tali? I also have, we also could open up to questions from who's observing and both. So Professor Zunker, to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tali. I liked it very much, and I especially would emphasize the relevance of the category of alienation and the question of how to overcome capitalism to solve the problem of alienation. I would like to start with your idea of the values and the universal contexts. As far as I remember from Amos you call him, I believe, in English. Amos was for me interesting, and I even used him in my lectures on social pedagogy and social policy and social theory as a starting point, to the surprise of my students all the times, because Amos is the first revolutionary, and that's the essential point. The prophets were revolutionaries, attacking the dominating powers, the ruling powers, and telling them, you left the path of God because you behave badly against your neighbor. If they are in debt, you put them, I don't know what the English term is, in the Schuldturm, in the tower of debts, and you behave badly against widows and orphans. And the essential point in the theology of the Old Testament was all times that that's an ethics of brotherhood. So you act morally valuable to your next, to your neighbors, to the one who belong to your group. And I think the challenge today is the universal, not only facing globalization, but the world is one village, one could say. And the question is, how could we deal with that question? Therefore, I was talking, Michael, to Joe this afternoon and said, I don't understand why Philip identifies alienation with loneliness. He should read Menachem Rosner, my old comrade from Kibbutz Reshafim and professor at Haifa University, or Karl Marx himself. The second point is the question of what you refer to as reciprocity and redemption. The socio-theoretical background, socio-philosophical background is the relationship between the individual and the community, society, or the collective. And I found it very interesting that Adorno already in 1944 in his criticism of Paul Tillich, his habilitation father, said, we criticized collectivity because now we consume collectively, but we don't live collectively. We criticize egalitarianism when it is only the expression of conformity, a topic with which Philip Wexler dealt in his studies on schooling. Schools have the task to produce conformity, not reflexivity, not individuality. And only a third, I'm a fan of Bowles and Gintis, Democracy and Capitalism. And in the first paragraph, they say, democracy and capitalism don't fit together, especially with respect to the central capitalist institutions in economy. And I think we have to discuss that again. And I just read a very fascinating study by a French scholar, Hamayou, The Ungovernmental Society. and the rise of neoliberalism as authoritarian liberalism. And in the end, unfortunately, only one page, he said the alternative is the idea of autogestion, of self-management, another type of ownership. Because capitalists, says Marx in the preface to the Capital, are the personifications of economic relationships. They are character masks. And as long as they act in the economic realm, they are more or less puppets for profit making. And that's a structural problem. And my question or my problem since 50 years is, how can we change these structural conditions? And therefore, I liked when I read Eric Olin Wright with his argument, we have to think about reform and revolution and about institutionalizing alternatives, other forms. Therefore, he deals with the cooperative of Mondragon. Sorry, too long.
No, that's fine.
not too long, not too long. We have a few minutes, so this is quite engaging, I think.
Well, if Heinz, I'd like to make some comments about what you said in your paper, but maybe first of all, I'll make one or two responses to this. You see, the essential issue in the Marxist view of capitalism is that it's governed by the profit motive.
Yeah.
Now, in Jewish thought, there is the idea that one is earning money in order to give charity.
Mm.
And there is the concept that the money one is going to give in charity, which should be at a minimum a tenth, much better a fifth, and some people give much more than that of what they earn. As Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the founder of Chabad, said, by a person giving a fifth of what they earn in charity, they are elevating the other 4/5. They are sacralizing the other 4/5 so that it becomes sacred. So that means the person's view of the money that is coming to them is not one of just simply the profit motive. It is something much broader. Mm-hmm. And in fact, Jewish business ethics, going back to the Talmud, has in it a very interesting element. If someone is selling a certain commodity, let's say he's selling a car to another person. Now he knows that this car, if it's driven at more than 80 kilometers an hour, it'll overheat. But the person he's selling it to can take it for a test drive around the city, but he can't go at 80 kilometers an hour. So the problem is not apparent. According to Jewish law, the seller must tell the buyer, I must tell you the problem with this car. If you drive it at 80 kilometers an hour, it'll overheat. So I once told this to a group of businessmen in a discussion group, and one of them said, people will think you're a mug. You're a fool. And another person said, and if you're a public company, how can you do that to your shareholders? So there you have a direct collision between Jewish business ethics and profit motive life. And so I believe that what the Rebbe wanted was that a more wholesome way of looking at life where profit, I mean, you see, even when we're considering Eric Wright's very, very thoughtful and very interesting book, since you said you were going to be discussing it, I hadn't read it before. I got it and I read it. I thought it was a fascinating book, an extremely thoughtful analysis of the issues and all the time aware of the problems lurking in the shadows and very, very nicely put together. But he's still very concerned about money. The whole thing is about money. That, he said everyone should get a no commitment wage. But life viewed from the point of view of social vision is not about money. Yes, you need money in order to buy food and put it on the table, but that's not you. I remember a very striking event that happened here in England. I teach as well as teaching in university, I teach in a high school. And the high school is a Lubavitch school, which for many, many years had a beautiful ethos. And then suddenly we became government funded. So the government had a system that if a teacher was successful, they would get extra money in their wage packet. I thought it was the most disgusting thing.
Yeah.
It was the meaning, the arts and spiritual corruption of teaching into a thing as if we were whatever. I mean, even you can't make such an example. From the Hasidic perspective, if a man is a cobbler making shoes, he's not doing it for money. He's doing it with a spiritual purpose. And the money he earns when he sells the shoe is in order that he should be able to do so. So that's one comment. And of course, the redemptive dimension is the sense of unity of the individual with the cosmos, because everything is fitting together. So I found those, it's a very productive concept. Now, there's one or two points
Talia, I'm just going to jump right in just to be aware of time. We're a little bit over time, so I think I'm very upset to interrupt this conversation because it's so fascinating. But in the interest of time, we're gonna stop the Facebook live stream right now, and we put in the chat the link to a breakout room where this conversation and other conversations can continue, and we invite everyone on the Zoom to please join the breakout room. But I want to hear the rest of this conversation as well. So that'll just be in the chat. If you open it up, it'll have a link, and if you click that, you'll leave this one. So we'll leave this open until everyone.
Yona, I can't see the link.
Tali, I emailed you one. Emailed you one. Yeah. So if anyone else can't see the link, please just say that in the chat, and I'll be sure to email you one directly. But everyone else who's on a computer should be able to see it. And also just want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And please join us again tomorrow at 11 a.m.
Thanks, Jonah.
Thank you. Bye, Michael.
Thanks, Jonah. Bye, Heinz. Bye, everyone. Bye, Tali. See you in a few.
Bye.
Thank you.
Whoops.
So if people click the link, they'll be leaving this, and it'll take a few seconds for us to start the next one because I don't want to leave this until everyone gets the link. So Heinz, if you want to join us, it's in the chat.
Yeah, are you joining us?
Okay.
Yeah, Heinz, I'd really like to continue the conversation a little bit. So I'm just going into the chat room. Are you going?
Yeah. Yeah, we try to get in. If we don't make it, I send you a mail.
Okay.
Okay, I see there are 3 more people as attendees. If Michael, Philip, and Roger want to join us in the
says
chat.
Here, the host has another meeting in progress.
Yeah, until I close this one, that one won't open. But I just want to make sure everyone gets a chance to get there. So if Michael, Philip, and Roger want to do that, it's in the chat. And I'll give it another 30 seconds for you to do that so I can open the next one.